The attack on Pearl Harbor was a tragic occurrence with almost 2,500 deaths in total, being a major conflict in the hearts of millions of Americans. However, we believe it could have been prevented, possibly with a little bit of a compromise.
What happened December 7th, 1941 has had a great effect on the entire nation of the USA. This bombing is very catastrophic for many reasons.
First of all, the attack on Pearl Harbor was a horrible day for all of America, taking thousands of people's lives and causing terror into the hearts of millions of Americans.
In addition, millions of dollars of equipment were destroyed. 4 American battleships sank, 12 battleships damaged, and 29 American airplanes destroyed, leaving 159 damaged. 4 Japanese midget submarines sunk, and 1 was grounded, and 188 Japanese aircraft were destroyed. But worst of all, 2,335 Americans killed, along with 64 Japanese men killed. However, this could have been avoided, and we will discuss why in a moment.
First of all, here's why Pearl Harbor was attacked. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor had several motives for this action. After Japan had been cut off from oil from China, Japan then decided to take over the Philippines and Malaya to gain back the resources that they had lacked after China had cut off their oil supply. So Japan decided to attack Pearl Harbor and damage their army as quick as possible so the Pacific Fleet would not interfere with Japan's plan to regain natural resources.
Before that, the U.S. was not fine with Japan expanding like they did. However, the U.S. did not actually decide to fight them until the bombing. Even though we were not at war, we were still sending surplus war supplies to the British. In addition to the situation in Europe, Japan was expanding their nation and sending their troops into other countries, including northern and southern China. At the time, the United States and China were allies. As Japan became bigger, they needed more resources such as oil, which led them into invading the Philippines. This did not make America happy, but we, again, stayed out of the war until the bombing.
The objective of the attack was to wipe out all of the U.S. Pacific Navy so they couldn't stop Japan from moving their navy around the South Pacific.
The President of the United States at the time was Franklin Roosevelt, serving his 3rd term in office. Britain and France had been at war for more than 2 years against the Nazis. The United States has remained out of the conflict.
President Roosevelt said that the U.S. military will only be sent to foreign land in case of attack.
On the night of December 6th, President Roosevelt sent a message to Emperor Hirohito, his counterpart in Tokyo, saying they had an important job to keep peace and avoid death and destruction. Roosevelt would soon find out his attempt to compromise would not work out as soon as he found out about the attack.
On December 7, 1941, they finally did it. Japan had bombed Pearl Harbor. Right at 8 o'clock in the morning, they came in with bombs and torpedoes, and only in 10 minutes, they blew up the USS Arizona, taking over 1,000 lives.
The USS Oklahoma, holding 400 lives, fell to its side and went below the ocean surface after taking quite a beating. Every ship on the harbor took some serious hits, including the USS Arizona, USS Oklahoma, USS California, USS West Virginia, USS Utah, USS Maryland, USS Pennsylvania, USS Tennessee, and the USS Nevada were all in bad shape. Later they were all recovered, but unfortunately the USS Utah and USS Arizona were left sunken in the ocean bay because of their serious damage and massive casualties on board.
The Japanese still did not complete their goal. The battleships they bombed were not the most important ships in the Navy. The most important ships were either away on the mainland or transporting planes that day. The ships that were away were aircraft carriers.
The carriers that weren't in the harbor were the USS Enterprise, USS Lexington, and USS Saratoga. There were even conspiracy theories as to why they weren't present. And this entire disaster could have been avoided had they been able to compromise.
Yoshimoto was one of the best strategists to ever have been in the Japanese Navy, and he was the admiral who planned the sudden aerial bombing on the U.S. naval vessels at Pearl Harbor.
Admiral Yamamoto was originally against the idea of getting on the bad side of the U.S., mostly for fear that a lengthy conflict would not be in Japan's favor. But once the government decided on war, Yamamoto knew that only a surprise attack that would severely damage U.S. naval Pacific forces has any chance of ending well. He also believed that if Japan had conflict with America more than 1 year, Japan would not last.
As was usual for the people in power of Japan, he wanted to show the Western people that the Japanese were a very respectable and not a weak, corrupt country. That made it all the more disagreeable and perplexing to him when the Empire of Japan decided to ally with the Nazis and Italy.
Planning the attack, he was well aware of how much more powerful the U.S. was than Japan, purely in resources such as oil and wheat.
The Japanese sent out their fleet on the 26th of November, containing 6 aircraft carriers, 11 destroyers, and even more. After getting into place 275 miles north of Hawaii, they sent about 360 planes to Pearl Harbor.
The map that we are showing here is a picture of the Japanese aircraft carriers' path as they went on from carrying airplanes such as the Aichi D-3A, VAL, Mitsubishi A6M-0, and Nakajima B-5N2, Kate, which were the types of planes that were used to attack Pearl Harbor.
Yoshimoto was in charge of the attack, even though he disagreed with taking action. If Japan's leaders listened to him, the attack would have never happened, and the U.S. would not have been in World War II.
But the Japanese government insisted on bombing Pearl Harbor, even though Yamamoto knew that we would destroy them if they bomb us. Yamamoto was very afraid of what was going to happen after we bombed them.
Now back on the American side of things. There were multiple ways that they could have been a little bit more prepared for an attack, at least on that particular morning.
Specifically, the people in Pearl Harbor were assigned to keep the valid and the curious away from the equipment during a 24-hour shift from 4 a.m. to 7 p.m. to sit inside a monitoring den that had an antenna to scan for planes. The 2 men that were in charge were in training that day and saw the planes approaching but didn't see them as a threat and thought that they were just for practice.
Also, the U.S. requested Japan to move its troops out of China, which caused problems with the U.S. and Japan. The Japanese Prime Minister decided to arrange a meeting with the U.S. and Japan to come to peace. So they arranged to have the meeting in Hawaii, but then President Roosevelt changed the location to Alaska, and the meeting just kept on getting put off from there, and it never happened. So that could have been one of the reasons Japan attacked us. But another way, they could have just compromised. The effect of the attack itself was pretty big. President Franklin Roosevelt gave a little speech the day after.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The United States was at peace with that nation, and at the solicitation of Japan was still in conversation with its government and its emperor, looking toward the maintenance of peace in the Pacific. The attack yesterday on the Hawaiian Islands has caused severe damage to American naval and military forces. I regret to tell you that very many American lives have been lost. In addition, American ships have been reported torpedoed on the high seas between San Francisco and Honolulu. As Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy, I have directed that all measures be taken for our defense, but always will our whole nation remember the character of the onslaught against us. No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory.
The most tragic part of the attack was the USS Arizona, which, due to it holding many who died, is remembered by thousands of Americans to this day.
The USS Arizona had been transformed into an amazing memorial.
Unfortunately, most of the deaths from the incident came from that ship, and there are still over 1,000 men on board.
It just shows that we should remember those who died for our country.
It also shows that we should always try to compromise with people around us we have problems with, or else a tragedy may occur. Thanks for watching.